C-SPAN 2 programming information is available to our viewers 24 hours a day. For the latest schedule rundown, you may call 202-628-2205. That's current information about C-SPAN 2's live gavel-to-gavel coverage of the United States Senate and other public affairs events that provide an inside look at government in action. Coming up next, a forum held by the National Security Industrial Association. On hand to discuss defense spending priorities for the 90s were the ambassadors of Turkey to the United States and Donald Atwood, who is a U.S. Deputy Secretary of Defense.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Because of the most distinguished group of people from around the free world here assembled, both at the head table and the audience, we have a tight time table, as everyone has a schedule. So we're going to start the program now so that we can get through when it's programmed. My name is Robert Martin, and I have the pleasure of running the symposia at ComDef, and it's a great pleasure to welcome all of you, many of you coming back now for the 4th year. Before we begin the formal program, I would like to take the personal opportunity to acknowledge a gentleman who is sitting in the audience, who is the organizer of ComDef, the man who created the concept, and I think has made a major contribution to the process of international defense cooperation, and that is Mr. David Whitetree. Can we give him a hand? I should have also told you, of course, that he's the chief executive of ComDef. I'd now like to go forward and introduce our distinguished guests at the head table, except for the 2 speakers. Not except that they're not distinguished, but except that Rick Barnard is going to have the pleasure of introducing them. But I will do this, since both of them have spoken here at ComDef before. I really would like to just make a personal note of welcome to Secretary Atwood for coming back, and for Ambassador Erdem, who's actually Erdem has come back for the 3rd time, which show, and the fact that both of them can speak here and draw such an audience shows you how distinguished and interesting they really are. All right, on my right, Ambassador Sven Herdman from Sweden. Sitting next to him, Dr. Albert Kelly, the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for International Programs. Sitting next to him, Ambassador Christos Zacharakis from Greece. Sitting next to him, General Luigi Stefani, the Secretary General and National Director for Armaments of Italy, who graced us with his presence last year. Sitting immediately to my right is Dr. Victor Rees, the Director of the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. At the left end of the table, General Wallace Robinson, who's the president of the National Security Industrial Association, which sponsors ComDef. Sitting next to him is the Honorable Colin McMillan, Assistant Secretary of Defense for Production and Logistics. Next is the Ambassador Nuzhet Kandemir, the Ambassador from Turkey. Next to him is the Honorable Dwayne Andrews, Assistant Secretary of Defense. Now, I'll leave the other introductions to the gentleman I am going to introduce, Rick Barnard is the editor of Defense News. I don't think any of you need an introduction to Defense News, but here it is, and here's even an application if you don't get it. All right? And Rick did not slip that in there, I don't think, for that purpose. In any event, Rick has been the moderator at our luncheon since ComDef began, has given us much useful advice on how to proceed, and is a most distinguished journalist who has had his own considerable experience in the defense field apart from the field of journalism. Now, before you arise, I have one other person that's in the audience that I would like to acknowledge, and that is Mr. Norm McIntosh, who is the Vice President of the Canadian Commercial Corporation, who is part of the distinguished Canadian delegation that came here for the opening ceremony, and whom I failed to acknowledge earlier. We want to thank you for being here, Mr. McIntosh. By the way, I'll do this Canadian style if I get it right. He's vice-président pour opérations aux États-Unis. All right. Mr. Barnard, would you please take over?
Thank you, Bob, and I can think of no more appropriate time than in these times to discuss defense spending priorities in the 1990s. It is certainly a time of tumult and a time of change, a time when many countries are learning firsthand about the high price of freedom and the high price of liberty, and deciding for themselves where their friendships and alliances must lie. And our first speaker, known to all in this room, I think, needs no lesson on that, because the police action in the Middle East has come at a high price to the people of Turkey, not only because of the termination or suspension of oil through the Iraqi pipelines, but tourism has been affected. Other forms of trade that Turkey once enjoyed have been affected because of the new relationship that they have had to insist upon with Iraq. There have been estimates that this will cost Turkey overall some $7 billion, and our next guest may tell us that that is very conservative indeed. Turkey continues to play a pivotal role in this crisis and in all of so many of our defense relations as a member of NATO. And I think it's important to note that in a time when many countries, and in particular members of the NATO alliance, are reducing their expenditure and looking at ways to decommission warships and fighting divisions, that Turkey is taking a different direction in the world. And to understand this, you need only look at a map of the region and put yourself in Turkey's place. It is surrounded by Syria, Iraq, Iran, the Soviet Union, Bulgaria, and Greece. Perhaps this helps us understand why Turkey is now in the market for 160 additional fighter planes and helicopters and fighting machines and so many other things. Overseeing all of this, and it's the establishment in Turkey these past few years of a defense industry, such as the Turkish aerospace industries, has been Ambassador Vahit Erdem, Undersecretary for Defense Industries. Before that post, he was acting president of the Housing Development Administration in Turkey. He has been a public official and policy analyst for the Turkish government for over 20 years. Please welcome, ladies and gentlemen, Ambassador Vahit Erdem.
Thank you, Mr. Barnard, for your kind introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, after a year of unforeseeable developments, which I am sure opened a new chapter in the history books, we have convened here again. I would like to say that it is certainly nice to be with an audience, many of whom are growing into friends. This gives us a chance not only to review the past, but also to revisit predictions in the face of emerging realities and make new assessments. I have great honor to attend 3 times to the Common Defense Convention and to have opportunity to address such a distinguished audience. I thank the organizers for this privilege and for the excellent organization they are providing each year for this event to promote and strengthen ties of collaboration existing among us. I will start by examining the possible influences of the newly developing securities environment in Europe on Turkey, without going into an analysis and forecast of the developments taking place in the Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, and also will try to address the situation in the Middle East. Turkey, as most of you in this room know very well, has made its decision to place itself in the family of Western democratic societies a long time ago. Progress has always been in the positive directions, and achievements of the country towards establishing parliamentary democracy with all its institutions is unparalleled among the developing nations. Most impressive, of course, in the drastic transformation undertook as a result of a series of reforms during the last 10 years. Starting from mainly state-dominated and battered economy around 1980, exports have been increased 6 times, ever-presented deficit imbalance of payment is turned into a surplus, and trade fully liberalized, perhaps even beyond some Western countries. At this point, I'd like to immediately add that when we have embarked on these economic reforms, they were not as fashion as they seem to be nowadays, and the entire operations have carried out under an unfavorable atmosphere and with lacking support. Results of the reforms in economic and social terms are evident in some basic indicators of the country. This is not to say that we have already solved all our basic problems, some of which arise as a result of the growth and progress itself. Today, Turkey is becoming a good example for those countries who are trying to transform their closed economies into a free market one. Parallel to these developments, as you know, Turkey has proceeded to submit its application for full membership to European Community, thereby expressly identifying her preferences. Unfortunately, soon after the emergence of the dissolution of the Warsaw Pact, we have seen clear or implied moves on the part of our Western allies, questioning remaining significance of the southern flank. If underlying these mood changes were not a latent thought to prevent Turkey's integration to EEC, then it has to be a misjudgment. Regardless of the degree of threat which West may attribute to Soviet Union or what may be left of it, Turkey's importance is the same or more. In fact, latest analysis of certain NATO strategists go as far as to hypothesize Turkey is the new emerging center of NATO, since Germany is now facing a rapidly demilitarized neutral buffer zone, while Turkey has borders to a region where military confrontation are increasing. Failure or delay in recognition of this reality, which seems to be escaping the attention of a lot of politicians and decision makers on both sides of the Atlantic and negligence of common defense responsibilities, together with unreasonable prolongation of a response to Turkey's standing inquiries for EC membership, may eventually lead to a situation that may potentially harm allied countries' very own best interest. The Gulf crisis may have ironically served the world's stability by reducing the unrealistically fast phase of the arms reduction prompted by the end of World War. Disappearance of the Warsaw Pact as a military power center was certainly a great step towards world security. Turkey has welcomed from the very beginning of the CFE treaty negotiations and finally its signature in the Conference on Security and Cooperation as a very significant event for the definition of the new security environment in Europe. However, it is and has always been the position of Turkey that we are not yet ready to receive the full benefits of the so-called peace dividends. The strategic importance of Turkey has always been the main subject of any alliance or talk on the Turkish-American relation. For that matter, in any attempt to analyze Turkish role in NATO. Though, as can be inferred from my remarks a while ago, policy of our government is this decade has been more in the direction of emphasizing importance of the country as a world trade partner, resourceful collaboration, and certainly a smart cooperation centered on crossroads of important markets. This is indeed the direction that we would like our relations progress in, but this should not be interpreted as the abandonment of our claim on strategic importance to Western alliance. I assume recent events in the Middle East has demonstrated the validity of the claim. Turkey, without hesitation, has done that it has to do, and clearly placed itself with its Western allies. Although this was a responsibility we carried as a member of the Western democratic community of nations, we naturally expect the appreciation of the circumstances unique to our position and severity of the economic and political consequences borne by Turkey. To summarize, Iraq was a major trading partner accounting about 15% of our foreign transactions. Turkish firms are currently engaged in close to $1 billion contract work in this country. Also, pipeline carrying Iraqi oil to the Mediterranean not only supply major part of our domestic consumptions, but also is a source of revenue approaching $1 billion a year. Considering Turkey's overall exports are $12 billion a year, it is easily seen that the incurred and potential losses for Turkey are much greater than any other country in this case. Furthermore, what is probably not convenient for now is the long-term effect on the situation, on our relations, and if the threat remains in the existence, necessity of seriously upgrading our defense in the area. This, we feel, is a burden to be shared with our allies. Since the strength of Turkey, both economically and militarily, is crucially important for maintenance of stability in the volatile region. I strongly believe that measures like 7-10 ratio have lost their already questionable cause and should have no application in today's complex security environment. Let me immediately correct any misunderstanding that may arise from this remark. It is not my intention to downplay the importance of a NATO ally and our neighbor, but to emphasize the drastically different security environment facing both countries. Even setting aside the major differences in area, population, coastline, and size of the armed forces, the infamous ratio is far from reflecting the adversity of our environment compared to our neighbor, not to mention almost any NATO member. I believe the time has long passed to do away with this ratio, which above all does not even sever the best interest of its originator. During the past years, I have always made a point of informing this audience about the status of development of our defense modernization program and any significant progress. First of all, I am sure it is by now a well-established fact that we have no intention to deviation from our objectives. That is, Turkey will pursue the defense modernization programs and will not yield from her ultimate aim of developing a defense industry to safety its fundamental requirements. Naturally and inevitably, change is taking place in political atmosphere and alteration of the threat considerations to some extent will influence our programs. But this would likely be in the form of revision or redefinition of the development strategy, rather than the abandonment of the concept. Due consideration is continuously given to the developments in the political environments and newly emerging force balances. Though we welcome with great enthusiasm the liberalization of Eastern Europe and strongly support and hope the continuation of the trend in the coming years. We believe the uncertainties facing Turkey does not yet provide with us an option of immediate diversion in our plans. I believe time so far has served to validate our program objectives as conveyed to this audience, and several of our declared projects have proceeded into the realization phase. This year, we have contracted the co-production projects of HFSSP radio communication systems, electronic warfare for F-16, mobile radars, C-Cube systems, and basic trainer aircraft, including additional direct procurement cases. The total number of contracts initiated in this period become 9. In addition, there are several research and development projects started in this year. Also, the contracting of the light transport aircraft project is expected to take place before the end of this year. We have already realized considerable amount of payments for the initiated project from the Defense Industry Support Fund managed by our organization. In all these and continuing programs, we had the close interest and participation of very prominent firms from almost all allied countries, several of which are also presented here. We hope that our association with them will continue as a mutually beneficial partnership in the years to come. However, I would like to repeat here our basic philosophy of bilateral trade. In a commercial relationship, we can not be continuously expected to be on the buyer side. Allied governments are strongly urged to create a two-way street for defense transactions. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to leave you with these thoughts. Especially in the aftermath of the Gulf crisis, it should be apparent that a militarily and economically strong Turkey can contribute greatly to preservation of peace, security, and stability in the area. However, to fulfill this role properly, it should be regarded as a partner not only in the security domain, but other fields as well. If we can develop our relations into this plateau, I believe Turkey can and will play a significant role in working out relationships between the emerging new societies and political structures and Atlantic Alliance. I thank you for your kind attention, and I wish this convention to produce successful results towards increased cooperation between our countries. Thank you again.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I would like to reserve questions until both of our speakers have finished, and then we will take questions at that time. The trends facing the United States, of course, are somewhat different than those for Turkey. As a result of the situation in Europe, many Americans say that believe that the United States should define for itself over the next several years a new role in the world for the United States. At the very same time that this is going on, the American government is engaged in an enormous buildup of military forces in the Middle East. This is being done at a time when the Congress and a portion of the populace are asking for a downsizing of American forces and spending less on defense. The recent defense budget passed for 1991 reflects that view. At the same time, this downsizing is supposed to take place, apparently, with very little or no cancellations of any types of hardware systems. The man who is supposed to bring off this rather miraculous feat is our next speaker. Deputy Secretary, before becoming Deputy Secretary of Defense in April of 1989, Don Atwood was, of course, Vice Chairman of the Board of General Motors. He was President of Delco Electronics and GM Hughes Electronics, and he has now left General Motors for what some say is the most difficult job in the Pentagon. Please welcome the Deputy Secretary of Defense, Don Atwood.
Thank you, Rick. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to join all of you here this afternoon. Each year, this conference makes an important contribution to the thinking we need to do about the evolving requirements for the common defense of the United States and its allies. Those requirements are evolving at a great pace in this era of strategic change. Thus, meetings such as this are more important than ever. The choices we make now, the direction of our national security strategy, the formation of new East-West relationships, how we handle the Iraq crisis, these issues will shape the future of the democratic world. With the elections and new governments in Eastern Europe, with reform going on in the Soviet Union, and with eased tensions between East and West, some people began to think that tough choices were no longer necessary. Peace was a given. Our security was assured. The direction these critics proposed for the Western alliance was retreat, step back from obligations, and unilaterally reduce our armed forces. But as recent events in the Middle East have made clear, in the real world, the choices are just as tough as ever. The complexity of world affairs is increasing, not diminishing, and the stakes remain very high. It's incumbent on us to remember our past as we face the opportunities which have been given to us. It was in the years immediately following World War I that America, in its haste to return to normalcy, turned away from foreign entanglements. We were confident that oceans would protect us, and that we could ignore far-off events. Consequently, we disarmed. We scrapped our artillery, our planes, and our ships. We forsook alliances and turned away from the League of Nations. We retreated into isolationism. As a result of those actions, we entered the Second World War totally unprepared, with only a small army, much of which was poorly trained and ill-equipped. Only a massive effort on our part and incredible sacrifices by some of our allies gave us time to rearm for the world struggle ahead. By war's end, American ingenuity and determination had built and equipped the greatest military force the world had ever seen. As we celebrated our victory, it was clear that America had become the leader of a community of nations committed to freedom and to democratic values. But there were others, most notably the Soviet Union and its Communist Party allies, who did not share our values. Thus, we entered the period which we call the Cold War. To counter this, we joined the League of Nations. We organized a system of alliances with many foreign countries, and we stationed our servicemen on guard around the globe. Behind that firm barrier, free nations prospered, and our values spread outward until the unstoppable yearning for freedom and a better life began to topple the totalitarian systems put in place by the Soviet Union and the communists. In the past year, we've witnessed the collapse of communism and the reemergence of democracy in Eastern Europe. Just last year, the world's attention was focused on East German refugees fleeing into Hungary. Thousands were trying to get to the West and out from under the burden of communist regime in the German Democratic Republic. Today, there is no longer a German Democratic Republic. And throughout Eastern Europe, free markets are taking root. In the Soviet Union itself, there is serious and ongoing discussion about instituting a free market system. Last year, we undertook a complete review of our strategy, and we developed new plans and new program guidance to better reflect the changes that were taking place throughout the world. We took a fresh look at the uncertainties and the regional contingencies that affect our future. We've already begun to build a new defense policy for this new era, an era less driven by the danger of a large-scale conflict in Europe and more concerned with the dynamics of regional contingencies. Our reformulated defense strategy has four major elements. The first is robust strategic deterrence forces. Strategic deterrence remains the bedrock of our national defense. Deterrence of hostile, strategic, and non-strategic nuclear capabilities is absolutely essential to the security of our nation. We must strengthen our ability to deter a first-strike nuclear attack on the United States, and we must have an effective defense against ballistic missile attack, especially now with the increasing proliferation of high-technology weapons in the hands of potentially unstable countries. Our objective is to increase global nuclear stability. The second element of our new defense strategy is the peacetime forward presence of U.S. forces. The forward deployment of our troops will remain a key element of U.S. strategy, albeit at reduced levels, consistent with changing threats. Forces for forward presence are essential for strong security alliances. They help preserve stability in Europe, and they maintain regional balances in areas that are undergoing great political and military change. The third element is a restructuring of our conventional forces for major regional contingencies and crisis response. With the prospects of a global war greatly diminished, our conventional forces will be structured in three groups: an Atlantic force, a Pacific force, and a contingency force. Collectively, these three forces will provide the necessary strategic capabilities for response and deterrence worldwide. The fourth element is the ability to reconstitute our military forces for global warfare. Although the prospects of such a conflict look especially unlikely at this moment, our national security demands that we have the capability to reconstitute our forces to at least present levels in the event that global confrontation does emerge at some time in the future. Our revised national security strategy is currently being implemented in the deserts of the Middle East. The present crisis in this strategically vital region of the world highlights the importance of America's global leadership. Strong U.S. leadership, from the Oval Office to the waters of the Persian Gulf to the chambers of the United Nations, have made it clear that America will continue to play a central role in the post-Cold War period. The United States is still the world's most powerful democracy. We, like other free societies, have an important interest in a stable world community based on respect for law and human rights. The United States has a well-established reputation for seeking equitable resolutions to difficult problems and avoiding violent confrontations. Our friends and our allies look to us to take the lead in diffusing crisis situations. This is our role in the Middle East. President Bush has set forth three clear, straightforward goals for resolving the present crisis. They are, first, the immediate, complete, and unconditional withdrawal of Iraqi forces from Kuwait. Second, the restoration of Kuwait's legitimate government. And third, the security and stability of Saudi Arabia and its neighbors in the Persian Gulf. The mission of our military forces is equally clear. They are in the region to deter any further Iraqi aggression. And if that fails, they're to defend Saudi Arabia and the other countries in the region. And they're there to enforce the UN-leveled economic sanctions and to stabilize the overall situation throughout the Middle East. We are not, however, alone in our pursuit of justice under international law. We've seen the nations of the world rise up in unprecedented numbers to join us in condemning the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait. It would be hard to overemphasize the importance of this global alliance, backed by the United Nations sanctions, that's now arrayed against Saddam Hussein. UN sponsorship has been essential in creating this alliance and in keeping it together. For the first time in its existence, the UN is now serving the purpose its founders intended it should serve, to protect the weak against aggression. For most of its first 5 decades, the promise of the United Nations went unfulfilled. The UN became a vehicle for the partisan ambitions of individual nations. Its role as a global advocate of right of each nation to chart its own course, free from the influence of others, was systematically thwarted. Today, the potential of the United Nations as a force for peace and stability is unmistakable. That's due in no small part to the unprecedented cooperation that presently exists between the United States and the Soviet Union. Cooperation that was unthinkable during the Cold War. It's also due to the support of the Arab League and the non-aligned movement, and indeed to the virtual unanimous sentiments of the entire international community. Never in recent memory have so many nations acted together to stop aggression and to condemn cruelty. As a result, Iraq has been isolated politically as well as economically. Unfortunately, Saddam Hussein's attack on Kuwait will not be the last act of aggression that the international community will face. The reality of international life is that such predatory designs will emerge from time to time. But the current crisis is a first opportunity to limit such dangers, to reinforce the standards of civilized behavior rooted in the UN Charter, and to help shape a more peaceful international order, one that is built on the promise of recent trends toward dialogue and cooperation throughout Europe. If we want to encourage peaceful change and to preserve the security of all of our friends in the region, America and its friends and allies must remain reliable partners for peace. We must demonstrate that Saddam Hussein's violent way is a different way, not the wave of the future. We simply cannot afford to let a rogue regime jeopardize world order based on the rule of law, which is the prerequisite to freedom and economic growth throughout the world. This is the first real test of the new relationships evolving in the post-Cold War era. We must not and we will not let this aggression stand. Our position is clear. We strongly prefer a peaceful solution consistent with the Security Council resolutions. We're exhausting every diplomatic avenue to achieve a solution without bloodshed. But again, we have to say that all options remain available. Let no one doubt that we will not rule out a possible use of force if Iraq continues to occupy Kuwait. Saddam Hussein must understand that the longer he occupies Kuwait, the surer and firmer the day of reckoning will be. The new world order of the 21st century will be founded upon three pillars: a strong America, a healthy and democratic Europe and Asia, and a new international cooperation on an unprecedented scale. These powerful forces working in harmony can give us the long-term peace we seek. At a time when global shifts are altering the strategic mantle of the world, we must remain ready to keep the peace no matter how difficult that may be. This we must do if the new world is to emerge, a world in which we and other free societies can grow and prosper. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I do this a great deal, and it's rare that we have two such distinguished guests on the same platform, so let's take full advantage in the time that is left. Please direct your questions to Ambassador Erdem or to Secretary Atwood or at large, and we'll toss them around a bit. So we'll take the first question. If you could just stand and identify yourself. It's always difficult to get the first question, so let's take the second question. Yes, sir.
For Ambassador Erdem. My name is Barnard. Sir, with all of your modernization activities going on now and in the years ahead, are you satisfied that you are receiving the kind of technologies that you need from both the U.S. and also other allied countries?
Thank you for the question. Yes, we have a big modernization program. As you, maybe most of you know, Turkey initiated new system for the procurement through in-country production cooperation between Turkey and the allied countries. One of our objectives is to gain technological capabilities in the production and to make the cooperation between two ways. In that respect, we are attaching great importance to technology transfer. We have difficulties, I should say. We signed a number of contracts, as I mentioned, so far. We will see during the implementation period. On the paper, it looks we had quite good response from the United States and from European countries, but we don't know how it will go during the implementation period. So we have just started to implement the program contracts. Now the many projects in the investment phase. If the contract completely realized, that means we will be satisfied in great sense. Thank you.
Another question. Don't be shy. Yes, over against the wall.
For Mr. Atwood, I was wondering if he could elaborate a little bit on the restructuring of the American forces he mentioned, specifically the Atlantic, Pacific, and contingency forces, and the global contingencies that he mentioned. How does it differ from what structures we have now?
Question was, would you please elaborate on the structure of American forces that you mentioned, Atlantic, Pacific, and contingency forces?
I think you're well aware that we've had an analysis ongoing for some time about what the future forces and the force structure should be in the United States. This involves the kind of active and reserve total forces that we need in all of the branches of the service, including fulfilling the commitments we have with the Navy in both the Pacific and the Atlantic, Mediterranean, and the Indian Oceans. A determination of the size and makeup of the Marines to go with that Navy, a determination of the size and makeup of the Army, including the number of heavy divisions, light divisions, and the makeup of the Air Force. All the while recognizing that we have a firm commitment over a long period of time in the Far East, including the stationing of forces in Korea and in Japan, commitments throughout Europe with our allies in the NATO organization, and commitments in the Middle East of a growing nature. And the force structure which we're developing is one which provides a balance of forces in those theaters of operation, as well as backup support contingency forces within the continental United States. That has been ongoing. We've dealt with Congress on these issues and have been, I think Secretary Cheney has, along with General Powell, made a number of discussions, presentations on the specific makeup of them. They are smaller. They are significantly smaller than they have been in the past, commensurate with the change in the environment throughout the world. And I think you will see as we come forward with our fulfillment of our 1991 budget and the fulfillment and the preparation and later fulfillment of our 1992 and 1993 budget, the significant makeup that we're proposing.
Yes, sir, in the back.
Secretary Atwood. Sir, my name is Chris Nyquin, Defense Assistant Management College. What long-term strategy do you foresee for international armaments cooperation?
Question is, Mr. Secretary, what long-term strategy do you see for international arms cooperation?
Well, I happen to be a deep believer in the sharing and the development of new weapon systems between the United States and our allies. For too long a period of time, we and many of our allies have gone our own individual ways. And it leads to a number of factors which are detrimental. Number one is we each independently develop without a relationship for the interchangeability between ourselves and our allies. It's very costly. We spend several times what we would if we joined together to develop some weapon system. And number two is the interchangeability among our various weapons is greatly diminished if in fact we don't work together. So I happen to believe strongly that we should, both bilaterally and in multi-country efforts join together for the development through technology for our new weapon systems. I think it had tremendous advantages to all of us, and I'm not one of those who is concerned about the sharing of technology. I think technology is a two-way street. All too often we in the past have felt that all that amounts to is sharing our technology with the rest of the world. Quite the contrary. Technology is not the prerogative of one country alone, and we have as much to gain from other countries as they do from us. And number two is there has always been a hue and cry that, gee, all we will do is put our production over in another country. That's not true either, because we're producing for ourselves, meaning the countries involved. And I see no diminishing in the content of the production that goes with a bilaterally developed weapon system.
I would like to ask a question of Ambassador Erdem. Sir, do you see your country as being a future manufacturer of Western-designed arms for Turkish allies in the region, such as Egypt? And if so, would you elaborate on that?
Yes, the objective of new defense industries program is to be manufacturer of the systems together with the alliance. Of course, when we talk about the production of weapon systems, we know that it is very costly and very expensive. So Turkey would like to cooperate with the United States and the other NATO allied countries to join to produce the systems that Turkish armed forces needed. So the existing program, we have identified about 12 projects. Those are urgent requirements of the Turkish armed forces. Those systems will be assembled and partly manufactured in Turkey together with our allies. Our intention is not to be self-sufficient, I should say, because it is impossible and it is too costly. This is why we are trying to study the feasibility in detail and to produce feasible parts and components and to gain integration capability. The systems, final system will be assembled in Turkey, integrated in Turkey, but many parts and components will come from our allies. So the purpose is to make the defense procurement two-way street. Just some years ago, till maybe beginning of 1990, still we are importing our requirements from the United States, mostly, and from Europe. So our economy is not strong enough to carry this importation. So we think that it is worthwhile to add our capabilities, engineer, workforce, and to use our existing industries to contribute to our modernization. So when we think about the production, that means joint production, co-production, not production by ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you. We have time for one more question, and here it is.
I'm Bob Surratt from Surratt Acquisition Management. The question is for Mr. Atwood. You mentioned forwarding positioning. In Europe, for years, we've had troops or large amounts of personnel stationed there, positioned there. We've also had pre-positioned equipment that additional troops could move in on. Now with the Middle East and the situation it is, do you see or foresee a similar situation where we may have troops stationed there and or large amounts of pre-positioned equipment? And for the conference personnel, what impact do you expect this to have on major item procurements in the future? Will we expected to see them go down? Will they level off, go up? What's your outlook, sir?
Could you hear over here? You can hear that?
There's a different situation that exists in the Middle East from what exists in Europe, in that we have been in Europe now for 40 some odd years, and obviously have been in Korea for something less than that. We are today the guests, the invited guests of the Saudi Arabian government. And to this extent, it would be very presumptive of me to look out in the future and say what their intentions might be over a long period of time. This is a situation that exists because of the urgency of the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, the desire of the Saudi Arabian government to seek help to defend itself and its other Persian Gulf neighbors, and we sit there in terms of that in being a guest for as long as the Saudi Arabians want us there to help deter aggression and to stabilize the situation. As far as prepositioning equipment throughout the world, I don't see any lessening of that in Europe or Korea or wherever we're talking about. I do see that the number of forces will be coming down. We will have prepositioned equipment, but at the same time we'll be drawing down our forces, as you know, in Korea already it's been announced to draw down, and in Japan and in Europe. And as a result of the hopefully recently concluded CFE agreement, we'll see a significant drawdown of equipment and personnel. But I do see prepositioned equipment throughout. Now, if I interpreted the second part of your question as to what do I see for a continued build-up of the defense industry production capability, was that what you're referring to? I feel that the market for defense weapon systems in this country will remain robust for many years to come. We are going from a budget of about $295 billion in defense down to about $278 billion in 1992. That's a significant reduction. But looked at the other way, that is a tremendous market for weapons over the years ahead. I do think it's sufficiently small so that those companies that are very weak, that are not investing in research and development, that are not adopting total quality concepts, who are just plain not competitive, are going to have increasing difficulty. But those companies that are built on a tradition of high technology, continued investment in research and development, dedication to quality, and dedication to on-time deliveries are going to continue to prosper in the years ahead. I feel strongly that the defense industry throughout the world is a continuing, evolving industry. I feel that the industry in this country, working hand in glove with much of the industry throughout the world, will continue to prosper in the years ahead, albeit at a reduced level. Thank you.
Thank you, and I think I speak for us all when I want to thank Secretary Atwood and Ambassador Erdem for being here and providing us with a thought-provoking and important conference today. It's good, been beneficial, I know, for defense journalists and perhaps for military officers and industrialists as well. And our thanks to both of them. And we have Bob Martin with a couple of announcements before we adjourn.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Rick, for your always excellent job. As an indication of the changing world, Friday afternoon at our second international briefing, the first Secretary of the Soviet Union will be speaking at ComDef, a most amazing event, thinking back a little bit, to tell us the Soviet view of the post-Cold War era. I'd like to also tell you now briefly about the future plans for ComDef. The Common Defense Forum luncheons, workshops, newsletter, and international business dossier will continue as in the past. But the events in the Middle East and Operation Desert Shield require special attention. As a result, in mid-1991, we will have a major symposium and what I would call a mini exhibition with an emphasis on participation, a note on participation, that reflects regional conflict issues as raised by the Desert Shield situation today. In early 1992, we will hold our fifth ComDef in Washington as before. I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank our speakers very much for their very excellent and stimulating remarks. Please take